Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to open another program of Am Yisrael Chai, with fascinating series of meetings on Jewish life, anti-Semitism, and everything else in between that's going on. And today, Heidi Bash Harod is going to introduce the topic and the speakers, and I want to really thank Heidi and also Sherry Wicker who are leading this series and really all the attention that we're giving to this in the educational realm, to really educate ourselves and other major educational figures and roles in our district, in the schools, etc. I want to welcome everyone on Zoom. There are a lot of people on Zoom, and also everyone that's here, and especially welcome John Aiden, who is the DEI director at Chadwick, the school that's here in PV as well. Thank you for coming and for giving your time and attention to this. So, Heidi, bevakasha, and again, hello to the panelists who will be introduced by Heidi, and thank you also for coming here from afar and with a lot of traffic. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rabbi Gretz, so much. I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have tonight with these three incredible panelists. Just to bridge from what Rabbi Gretz was saying, this is I think it's the fifth program in the Am Yisrael Chai series that was made possible through the United Synagogue Conservative Judaism grant that we received. And it's in partnership with Congregation Ner Tamid and with 360 Perspectives, founded by Sherry Wicker. So there's many things that we could talk about in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who knew that tonight would be the week, in the same week that President Trump would make an effort to completely cancel DEI. So it's on all of our minds. I mean, unless your head is, in the sand or something and you really don't listen to news, which would be miraculous, then you have definitely heard this term this week. So this is a great week to be talking about it. It's on all the podcasts, on all the news segments. So I'm excited to have a very civil conversation about it, because whether or not you disagree with what the president's approach to DEI is, it is something in our atmosphere. It is something that influences our schools, our businesses, the way that we interact with each other. And therefore, we have to acknowledge and work with it. And when we're talking about DEI and the Jewish community, there are some gaps that we're going to talk about tonight. So again, this program, Am Yisrael Chai, really came out of a response to October 7, when many people in the Jewish community felt that their experience was not being seen or heard or honored in light of what was happening. And that sort of caused a reflective moment to say, who are we as the Jewish people? Are we understood? What does it mean to be the Jewish people? Who are the Jewish people? How do we define ourselves to the outside world? We understand who we are on the inside, but there's a lot of disconnect between the inside and the outside world. And so this series has really been curated and thought about to help our community reconstitute our identity and who we are as the Jewish people, that we are not just a religion, that is Judaism. We're not just a language of Hebrew. We're not just a culture. Jewish culture is very diverse and vast, depending on where you were flung to in diaspora thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, or whenever you became a Jew in the diaspora. We have an ancestral homeland that we're connected to, the land of Israel. So all of these things have become, front and center for everyone's minds. So these are the conversations that we've been having. We had one about what is the definition of Am, of being the nation of Israel? What does that even mean? We had a film screening for fun in October for Sukkot. In November, when it was election time and Thanksgiving, we had a workshop on how to have difficult conversations with people that we love. In December, we talked about ethnic studies and liberated ethnic studies being used as an anti-Semitism tool in schools, and how do we push back against that? How are we supposed to advocate for ourselves? And tonight, it's DEI 2.0, addressing the gaps. Some of the things we're going to talk about is, where do Jews fit into the framework of DEI? When I think of the Jewish experience and DEI, I really see a glaring gap. So there's phrases and ideas that I've heard in the past few years, such as anti-racism, oppressor versus oppressed, white privilege, equity versus equality. So all of these ideas and concepts swimming around in my mind in a post-October 7 reality, I've come to feel that DEI is yet another tool to disenfranchise the Jewish people from our history, our ancestral homeland, and to deny our experience, to gaslight us. And I know I'm not alone in this, but that's not the whole story. And the people who created DEI, it wasn't for the purpose of discriminating against Jews. Absolutely not. That's not why diversity, equity, and inclusion programs were created. Very good people develop these ideas and constructs to address social, cultural, economic problems in American society, which we always need to improve ourselves. As I mentioned, DEI is part of our businesses, our schools, our cultural discourse. It's all around us. And so how do we as a Jewish community, as the Jewish people, engage with DEI and the folks who implement these ideas and this framework into our places of work, our schools, and our consciousness? And what can we do to make sure it doesn't continue to be another tool of anti-Semitism? How do we distinguish between when it is and isn't being used for nefarious purposes? So tonight we have 3 individuals to have this robust conversation with. So it's my honor to introduce them. To my left is April Powers, VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Project Shema. April Powers has spent her professional career helping organizations manage differences through training, recruiting, and diversity and inclusion strategy. After experiencing extreme online anti-Semitism, April joined Project Shema to do her part to ensure that anti-Semitism education is folded into robust DEI programs. Next to April, we have Yvette Talton, who is the Director of DEI and Belonging at Oakwood School. And I have to say, April and Yvette really came very far this evening. So thank you for time and resources put into getting here and being with us. So Yvette, with 20 years of experience in education, including teaching middle school students and serving as Director of Outreach, she is a certified DEI practitioner. Her work is dynamic and evolving, requiring patience, curiosity, and care to ensure that everyone in the community experiences a strong and enduring sense of belonging. That's a tall order. It's a lot. And next to Yvette, we have Max Samarov, who is the Executive Director of Research and Strategy at Stand With Us. And Max is in North Redondo Beach. He is an incredible resource to the South Bay Jewish Advisory Group and to all of us here in the community. Since joining Stand With Us, a nonpartisan international nonprofit dedicating to educating about Israel and fighting anti-Semitism, Max has worked with communities around the world to tell Israel's story, counter misinformation, and stand up to campaigns of hate, like the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement on campus and liberated ethnic studies in K through 12 schools. So there's so much, decades of experience here, endless opportunities to explore the things that we want to talk about tonight. So I'm first going to start with one question that is both for Yvette and April. So I'm going to ask both of you to answer the question in whatever order feels great. So what is DEI and its purpose? Let's start with there. I'd love to hear a definition that guides you in your work. And in that, sharing that definition, share about the work that you do in the day-to-day, the scope of it, the goals within the framework of creating a DEI-friendly environment. So please, Mike, over to you all.
So DEI, it's had quite the evolution, especially even since I've been doing this work for quite some time. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, civility, anti-racism, and accessibility and allyship. We have expanded the acronym to be so many other things. But I think it's helpful also to start with what it's not. Because I think a lot of people think DEI is affirmative action. Affirmative action is a set of laws that came down to make changes to the systems that we have for hiring and acknowledging that there are so many ways that minorities have been impacted by racism, discrimination, the enslavement of bodies, and a whole host of other things. But really, DEI and affirmative action, DEI has benefited white women more than any other group. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, and belonging, and all the other things, is really about what happens when you come to an organization. So when you arrive, affirmative action is inviting you to the party. DEI is what happens when you get there. Is it an environment of belonging versus inclusion? I'm going to invite you into my space. We're going to do things how I do it. And the belonging piece is really, we're going to build this together so that everyone has a stake and everyone is included, including Jews. It should definitely necessarily include Jews. We're looking at intersectionality. We're looking at accessibility. There are people who think differently, who need accessible options when they're doing their work. There are people with different family systems that need different things at work. When we think about equality, that everybody gets the same thing, no matter who you are, you're going to get the same thing. I'm 5'1". If you give me a bicycle for a 6-foot person, I'm probably not going to be able to ride it. Like, right? We have that bicycle image. Equity is about giving people what they need when they need it, and creating an environment where people feel safe to bring their entire selves at work to work. So I'll let you, if I left you.
You did the whole thing.
Sorry. No, there's more. I'm sure there's more.
No, that was wonderful. No, for me, I think one of the things that I like to consistently say to myself is this work is about humanity. So to me, DEI is a tool, is a framework to recover and at times uncover like the deep, I would say, aspect of our humanity. And we can see that in what we're dealing with today in our Jewish community, that there is a struggle with our humanity and how to actually navigate it. And I think when you think about DEI, I like to come to it with curiosity, making sure that I'm looking at the values, checking for blind spots, always trying to build connection through listening, understanding, and also just honoring people's lived experiences. So when I think of DEI, I'm like encompassing that within, before I even start the work, I want to remember what the goal is within this so that I approach it with the right mindset.
Yvette, I'm going to ask a follow-up question. So DEI, can you give us a picture of how it materializes at Oakwood, for example? So when I say what is DEI on its purpose? What is the purpose? What is the mission of a DEI program at Oakwood School?
So for us, it changes every year. You can't expect it to, this year, you may have a neurodiversity group. Next year, they graduate and they say, you know what, we don't want it, and my job as the Dean of DEIB is to really always be looking at what they're saying and what the need is. So for instance, when I first started at Oakwood, we actually didn't have affinity groups. It was, strongly rejected to actually have them. And eventually the students came to me after teaching a class about diversity. And they said, you know what, why can't we have these conversations all the time? It felt so good to be able to share about myself, right? And so as someone, and at that time, I wasn't even a practitioner. I was just teaching a lesson within that. So it started with a Latinx affinity group. And then the next year, it was a Black student affinity group. And eventually it kind of grew. And then finally, I had students coming to me, Jewish students, that said, like, we want that. And everyone's like, wait, why do you want that? You're white, right? And so we had to take that moment to kind of educate our community, listen to our students. And that was, I think, the hardest part, because there's listening and then there's believing, right? And so people would listen to what they say, but not believe their experience. And I think in that moment, in order to push forward that, it was a lot of pushback to start a Jewish affinity group, but it happened. And it was more of like educating people, knowing that people were going to make mistakes, and they're, DEI has kind of grown and changed as it should. And it should always be changing and growing. And for me, that's where I go to the work knowing that a student might come to me and I have one way of thinking, or parent, because I also work with the parents. And I have to reevaluate my own, values and way of thinking. And so for me, that's just one specific way of how DEI has kind of evolved, but also what it looks like at an Oakwood school, where our students are taught to, to speak their voices, to say how they feel, but there's also a look like how can you do that with a voice of humility and humanity.
So staying with the school example, but for anyone to respond to. So for those who don't know what affinity groups are, so that we might want to define an affinity group, but before we just, say this is what an affinity group is, I want to say, when I learned of affinity groups, I thought to myself, well, when I was in high school, which is when affirmative action was canceled in California, it was Prop 209 or something like this. I was on public access television saying, I don't think that we should do that yet because women don't have equal opportunities even still. So, I mean, that was one political issue I felt aware of when I was like in 9th or 10th grade as the VP of Government Club. Which my point is, once upon a time in high school, that's how you expressed yourself, right? Like your identity could come up in your student groups, your government group, your Jewish culture club, your Asian American club, your drama club, whatever it is. So I'm just sort of curious, if that wasn't addressing, what's the difference between an affinity group and a student club? And what need does an affinity group meet that a student club doesn't? And what are the pros and cons of not enforcing, but encouraging or developing affinity group spaces? And April, please also chime in.
Yeah, affinity groups, well, clubs, first of all, it could be a knitting club. And is that like everyone knitting? Is that sort of an affinity group? Yes. But an affinity group at Oakwood deals with identity. And we have 12 affinity groups. And we also have alliance groups, which are very similar as well. Alliance groups can be gender oriented. And so we have like a gender equality club where it's geared toward our female identifying students. And then we have an LGBTQ club and it alliance space that allows for our, sorry for the ringing there. But we have an LGBTQ alliance space where our community can come together and really support each other when things happen around the school that have to do with them. If they are dealing with, let's say, GECO, they talk a lot about microaggressions and misogyny, actually. And so in that sense, like they then will come to me and say, like, this is happening. We want to make sure it stops. And then it's my job to make sure it stops. So affinity groups are a bit like segregation. Like some people say, you're segregating. Yes, we are kind of doing that, but it's done in a way that is, there is healthy segregation where students that are having stressors, if you are one of very few, then it is going to be helpful for you to have, support with people that identify as you do. And so that's kind of the benefit and what an affinity group is, if you want to add to that.
So affinity groups, we don't use it as much in corporate America.
Yeah.
We say more ERGs, employee resource groups, because there is a tie to the bottom line, and there are usually business reasons to have them. I think there's great business reasons to have them in schools also, but in the corporate world, affinity sort of was like, oh, are we going to have a party here? It lost its business meaning, and we needed to circle back and say, okay, there is an actual benefit to the organization for having groups who get together, who have similar backgrounds. Why would you do that? Because what we call it is outside the gaze of, right? So if I want to just, and we'll use Jewish affinity groups since that's what we're talking about. If I just want to talk about being Jewish and just be comfortable with all my Yiddish expressions. And I want to just say that I didn't like this thing that happened to me. I don't want to have to do that in a space with a whole bunch of other people judging how I'm saying, what I'm saying. I just want to put my feet up on the couch and be able to be my whole self. And sometimes, especially for young people, being your whole self is a little bit more comfortable being with people who are like you, whether that's women experiencing, people who identify as women experiencing misogyny, or Jews experiencing anti-Semitism, saying, oh, well, you are a white religious group, you don't deserve that kind of protection, even though you're experiencing this, doesn't make any kind of sense. And I'm sure we'll talk about Jewish identity later, but at least in the business world, some of these affinity groups or affinity spaces or ERGs, employee resource groups, business resource groups, come together to help companies also understand that particular group. So they're responsible for all manner of programming. I would imagine that happens at the school too, where we're going to celebrate Jewish American Heritage Month. So the Jewish Affinity Space Group or the Jewish ERG is going to put a bunch of things together for that. What's really important because also is, understanding other cultures, cultural aptitude and understanding. So having these built-in groups, whether it's Asian or Black or Latinx, will adds value to an organization because it's kind of like almost a built-in research group, right? When I was at Nestle, the world's largest food and beverage company, we brought in products from Latin America, and then we had these line extensions based on the American experience, right? Because we had people who had Latin American experience with abuelita hot chocolate, but they liked Nesquik, and so they, turned it into all these other things. So there are, also business benefits to having those spaces, but more importantly, having safe and brave spaces for people at work and to come together with, as you mentioned, grievances. It's easier to do that as a group versus as one person.
And I'll just be
Can
very,
I add
yes,
a little
yes, of
bit to
course.
that? Because one of the things that we do is with our affinity and alliance groups, when there are different heritage, months that come up, they are able to kind of design and say like, here's how I want to be celebrated. This is what I want to do. And instead of us saying like, oh, this is how we're going to honor you, we allow them to tell us, what does it take to honor you? What do you need? And we have a budget, of course, that supports the students to make sure that all of them can have the same experience and opportunities. But that's a huge piece to our students. They get so excited to be able to be a part of that. And then once I find out what the students are wanting, and then I bring in our parents who also have parent affinity groups, and they help make it happen because students don't always follow through.
I have my Max, definitely, but then I have my question for you that sort of segues it from this to that. Yes, go ahead.
So I would say my and my organization's perspective on this, in one way, it really is informed by the fact that our entire model of working on university campuses and in high schools is basically built around identifying primarily Jewish student leaders in high school and at universities who generally are part of whether it's formal or informal, what you could describe as a Jewish affinity group, and then giving them education, giving them skills to advocate for themselves, advocate for their communities, educate other people, put on programming, all kinds of things. We can work with individuals, we can provide resources to individuals, we can educate individuals, but it's so much more effective when there is an organized, active group of Jewish students at a school who already exists, and we can just empower them to do what they're trying to do that much more effectively. So in that sense, you could define affinity group in different ways, but if these organizations didn't exist, we would be just exponentially less effective in the work that we do to educate about Israel and fight anti-Semitism across the whole country, and even in other countries too. I guess the flip side of it, and where I think we run into issues, tends to happen a couple of different ways. One is, I mean, I think I can remember off the top of my head, I think a lawsuit by employees at Stanford University from a few years back, where I think there was a program that was held that divided different staff within a department or a school at Stanford into different affinity groups. And when the Jewish staff said, "Hey, we want to have a Jewish affinity group within this program," they were told, "No, you have to go with the white group." And I think, we were just talking about a different example of something like this happening. So unfortunately, those types of students or those types of cases seem to be kind of a dime a dozen. The other thing is that we're also seeing sometimes efforts to basically turn other affinity groups from other communities against the Jewish community by telling them that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is exactly like whatever oppression that they are going through, whether it's anti-Black racism or racism against any other group, oppression against any other group. There are unfortunately folks who are actively trying to co-opt different causes and different people's struggles and turn it against the Jewish community, and so we end up having amplified divisions and amplified tensions between different, affinity groups, whether they're officially called that or not.
Can I just comment on what you just said? And this is one of the pitfalls of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the United States, because we develop this. This is core to who we are as a country. We try to overlay the big mistake is we try to overlay U.S. racial dynamics and that understanding over other countries' conflicts and situations in very wildly inappropriate ways. And it just tells me so much about the diversity practitioner when they try to do that. And that's one of my concerns also, is that there are DEI professionals who are not looking at things holistically, are not taking a global approach to, okay, just like what you said, you tell me what you need. Like, I'm not going to go into India and pretend to understand all the racial minority groups there and then overlay a US DEI program for that. So just the same way you're saying, this oppression is exactly the same as that oppression over there. I mean, people like heuristics, they like binaries. It's easier to understand something when you simplify it like that. And we can get into what happened to DEI, I guess, in one of the other questions. But that international overlay of US DEI frameworks, we have to get people away from that, because it's harmful not only to us because we're totally misunderstanding, but it's harmful to the people that we're trying to support, because we're not getting exactly the equity, what they need, not based on what our framework is for them.
So Max, you totally anticipated my question. So you've answered my question, but maybe are there any other cases or experiences of DEI programs gone awry for the Jewish community that are coming across your desk before I ask another question of April?
Sure. So real quick before that, I do want to say, we have a variety of different experiences working with DEI professionals at different schools and K-12 space and on campus. We do have cases where we brought educational resources and programming to the head of DEI at schools in different parts of the country, and they were more than receptive and happy to have us educate their community about anti-Semitism in the Jewish community and what have you. That does happen. It's not it's not like a monolithically terrible experience. But again, we run into these issues, these cases where one way or another, whether it's an individual program or it's the head of DEI at a school, where either because of just ignorance about Jewish identity and anti-Semitism, concerns are ignored, or requests for education or an affinity group or what have you are denied. Or sometimes there's actually active harm done by a DEI program. The thing that's on the top of my mind right now, because it literally just happened, is at my former high school, Brookline High School in Massachusetts. Just for context, this is one of the most Jewish communities in the entire country. Like, people call it Baruch line. No joke. And in that context, and also like one of the most educated, probably, places in terms of, the families, like I would think the school staff, the administrators, even in that environment, we just had a situation where the school had what they called a day of racial reform and solidarity, where they chose to a captive audience of the entire student body, every teacher, all the staff members, the entire school. They chose to put a speaker on that platform who just a couple months earlier had been out at a protest celebrating October 7th, like right around the anniversary of October 7th. Concerns were brought to their attention ahead of time that this was a bad idea, that this would undermine the entire purpose of the event, that they should figure out a way to do this differently. They ignored it. They bulldozed ahead. The day before the event, they sent out an email to all students saying, we know that this may end up being hurtful. If you need a school counselor, go see a school counselor. And they didn't say, Jewish students, if this is hurtful to you, go see a school counselor. But like, that's who it was going to be hurtful to. And so now there's the fallout. That's going to play out over the next week or two. I'm hearing that people want the principal of that school fired or for him to resign now, unless a host of steps happen. So, long story short, there's healthy and right ways to do this type of work, and then there's a lot of landmines that people keep seeming to step on.
Thank you. So my next question is, April and Yvette, how does DEI understand or position Jews and Jewish communities?
Yeah, I can. I think one of the biggest things is, first we have to invite them to the party, in the sense of like, for us, we needed to make sure that we allowed our parents that wanted to start a Jewish affinity group for parents. They have to be able to do that, and that way we have a line of communication to them. When things go wrong, we could talk about it. We could sit there and build a connection to the community. And I feel like we're at a time right now, just going to what you said, where it's like, if I feel like you got something better than me or more or whatever, you got to do this, I want it. Now the school owes me the same thing, even though that wasn't really what you needed. But there's a sense of like, kind of an all or nothing kind of thing. Like, we should all get the same. And so for me, within the DEI, it's been so helpful to kind of have that line of communication, so that parents aren't coming to me like, angry about how their child was feeling. They're coming to me like, I know that you're somebody I can talk to and tell you what just happened to me. And that took time. It took time because there was a lot of hurt that happened with October 7th happening, and how people reacted, and how there was a feeling of like, hey, we didn't even get to like feel, and we had to like fight and battle for the humanity of our children. And so there, I think when all of that was taking place, it was this moment of like, we just start doing things. Send this email, like, let's fix it, let's resolve it. We gotta like slow down. Slow it down. It doesn't, I know parents are gonna come for you, and they're gonna want you to do it like yesterday. Like, you're supposed to respond in this way. but it needs to slow down. There needs to be a group of folks that you can trust. So it's not just all on the practitioner to do the work, the DEI practitioner, but there's a group involved so that we can think really holistically and bringing in our parent group so that we can do it right. And that is whether it's our Jewish family or whether it's our Black families, whatever affinity space, you have to build that, or else it seems like you're not listening. Like you're doing your thing and not listening to what their real needs are. You're thinking that you know and you don't know.
So I have one comment about what you said about, and then I'll address your question. I hope you'll tell me.
I'll follow up if
You mentioned, Max, that the Jewish students might need counseling, but I'm going to also go a little bit farther and say, if any student sees the school doing that, every student is impacted by that bad behavior. It isn't just Jewish students that are on this receiving end of this horror that they're watching somebody celebrating a massacre, which, I don't know the whole context, but if you're watching a student celebrating a massacre and violence to other human beings, and then that person is platformed on campus, what message are you sending to the entire student body, Jewish or not? That is, for me as a child, that would scare me. Maybe they're justifying it in some other way, but that would, whether I'm Jewish or not, that would concern me. So I'm going to give you the global DEI, what I have seen, not at schools as much, but I think it still applies. One of my DEI buddies said, I was always taught, don't talk about religion or politics at the dinner table, so we're going to leave it out of DEI. And there are so many really great business reasons to include religion. That's a whole other conversation. But what's happened in DEI historically, including me, that's why I'm here doing this, is because I didn't do it, and I want to help people avoid it, is Jewish identity and anti-Semitism education, Jewish cultural heritage ERGs or affinity groups have not traditionally been a part of the DEI framework. Why? Because there's a presupposition that Jews are part of a majority culture, which there was just a ruling actually that Jews can now apply for minority grants and things like that. We're 2% of the US population and over 65% of religious hate crimes. I don't know where that number is going to go after this year, but it's only going up. And so we have not traditionally, I'll say, we have not traditionally been a part of the DEI framework because there's this distillation and flattening of Jewish identity into whiteness or a religion, not without the understanding. Like if you think about it, our calendar is almost 6,000 years old. So our identity and heritage and the way we've been doing things, it predates any modern Western concepts of group identity or a race or ethnicity, because we cover almost every race and various ethnicities. We're an ethno-religion. We intersect with all of the other aspects of DEI, whether that's LGBTQ plus identity, various family situations, caregiver status, did I say LGBTQ plus, disability, neuroatypicality. We are Jews in all hues. More than half of Israel would not be considered white in this country. 20% and probably more, they're getting more numbers this year, of us are probably Jews, would be identifiably Jews of color. And so when you say, hey, you can come into this space, into DEI, if you have any of these things, that would cover most Jews actually. Jewish identity is we're a culture, a people, a heritage with a nation and a language, and we're an ethno-religion. So most Jews, if you look at Pew Research, we're not that religious, at least in the US, like 70% of us are like, nah, and if you have a religious space, that means that a lot of Jews aren't going to feel comfortable going there. They're like, I don't know all my Torah portion. I don't know Hebrew. I just want to hang with Jews and do Jewy things. right? And me not knowing, I've never been to Israel. I can't read, Hebrew. Like this conflict and all the things that are happening in there, like does that apply to my life other than the fact that I have a tie to the nation, the people of Israel? Like the vast majority of Jews are Zionists, and we can define that also. But has DEI taken the necessary steps to understand Jewish identity? No, we're a small group. However, find me a DEI practitioner in 2025 that is not spending an inordinate amount of time on this issue who needs to understand it. So the smartest DEI professionals that I've met know they need to address this, right? They're in the room, they're asking, they're seeking it out, they're taking the extra time, money, and resources to tackle this problem because it's costing them time, money, and resources. And they need to get it right, not tokenize Jewish voices that they think align with, their concept of DEI, but really majority mainstream Jewish voices that are going to help you understand the vast majority of the Jewish community.
So, Yvette, you're one of those practitioners who has done a tremendous amount of work to understand Jewish identity and Jewish experience. I hope that you're not unique in that. I don't know. I have no idea. But I would love for you to share with us so in our pregame conversation, you shared that even when the Jewish experience is explained and emotionally or clinically, whatever it is, that there seems to be a resistance to really believing the Jewish experience and the Jewish story. Tell us how you have been why are you able to listen and to validate and to understand? What is different about you and your approach to the work, or what experiences have you had that allow you to have an open ear and compassion and empathy?
I think for me, that's just who I am. I am that person that I'm always curious about someone. So if we're sitting together on a plane, we might end up in a whole conversation, and I want to know about you, like whatever you want to share. And so, yeah, for me, I've always been a curious person and really wanting to hear other people's experiences. Like, I think that is missing, to be able to not just hear people's experiences, but believing them. A lot of times it's heard, and then there's a debate around whether you really feel that way or not, and why you shouldn't feel that way. It doesn't matter why you shouldn't, or that's how you feel. And so we have to start valuing people's feelings and their beliefs and their experiences, because if we don't, next time it could be you. And so for me, that's the conversation that I have. So because I'm also a faculty sponsor for our Black Affinity group, so I go in, and if I hear a student say like, Jewish people aren't Black, and I have to have that conversation right there. And it's not to humiliate them or tear them down. It's pulling them aside and just giving them a quick education around what they said and how that could be hurtful, because we do have Black Jewish students at Oak Ridge. We have students that is Puerto Rican and Jewish. So there's a lot of diversity in there, and there's an assumption that based on skin color, that's who you are. And so it's really, and we're still working on it. Like we're always bringing in new students. There's who knows what they picked up. So it's a constant, you have to be ready to have that conversation. And a big thing with students is, if you are a practitioner, spend time with them, check in on them, because that's going to go far when you get ready to say to them that was hurtful to someone, like whatever it is that they said. Because then they're not going to take it as in anger. They're going to take it as, oh, I'm really sorry. And you can better educate them on the things that they've said. And kids are kids. They're picking up things on social media. out in the streets, however they're getting this information, it's important for us as a school to recognize kids are going to make mistakes. They're going to say things, they're going to do things, and we don't throw kids away. We then, what we want to do is have a holistic approach, an approach where we can educate them and really support them in being their better selves.
Thank you, Yvette. Max, taking this a little bit farther, what are some of where is this coming from that we're not believing the Jewish experience? DEI is a very thoughtful framework. As April mentioned, it does have, there are gaps that Jewish people were not, the Jewish community wasn't exactly like built into the framework. It was more of like an American racial inequality to remedy things that didn't get remedied by civil rights movement or affirmative action. It is sort of, it's an evolving process. Human beings are not perfect. We always discriminate against each other. It's like a survival thing or something. It's in our biology. Okay, so we always have to work to improve. But the sort of the denial of the Jewish experience and the resistance to listening, this is also very well thought out. So I know that Stan with us knows the ecosystems that are being created where this denial of Jewish experience, the resistance to recognizing Jewish ethnicity, et cetera. Tell us what, maybe this is where we're talking about Zionism. Zionism is racism. Give us you're a researcher, so throw us in with you.
Sure. I mean, this is really the subject of its own entire session. So I'm going to be not nearly comprehensive here, but I think that to a large extent, the challenges that we're experiencing with DEI are a symptom of a much larger problem. And that problem has some different roots. One of the biggest ones is higher education. Our higher education institutions, especially it seems like disproportionately the elite ones, and particularly within those institutions, the humanities departments have become a source of some of the greatest ignorance and the worst ideas and misinformation about the Jewish community, about anti-Semitism, about Israel. And, you know, and it's probably, the narratives probably aren't so new for folks, but, you know, it involves, for example, you know, taking the study of colonialism and post-colonialism and basically weaponizing it against the Jewish people to say that the Jews who went to Israel, which is in fact the Jewish homeland, are colonizers in that place, which is literally the only place in the world we could refer to as our homeland, given that's where Jews started our identity, our language, our culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of decolonization gets weaponized against our community to promote hatred and violence against us. Post October 7th, I mean, I was well aware of it before October 7th, but to see academics at various universities, you know, going out in public and talking about how exhilarating that was and how, you know, did you think decolonization was a metaphor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, things along those lines, you know, I think really brought it to a lot more people's attention. So you have ideas like that coming from academia. You've got the overall idea we've already talked about that Jews in general are the sort of white, privileged mainstream class and that do not need to be prioritized. You know, anti-Semitism was an issue during the Holocaust. It's not a priority now. All these things, I think, in many cases, the source is basically academia. And because you have people going through academic institutions and then into K through 12 schools to be teachers, to be administrators, to be people in, you know, basically positions of power, because you have folks with great credentials from higher education institutions going to speak at various venues as figures of authority, to go train people for professional development and things like that. You basically get to a point where this bias becomes institutional. And I'm like painting with a broad brush here, but that is the case in far too many situations we're dealing with. This bias and this anti-Semitism in many cases, it is not just on an individual level, it's on an institutional level. And so what we're having to do is actually ask our K through 12 institutions to fix a problem that our higher education institutions are responsible for. When in an ideal world, it would really be the opposite way, the other way around. If we want to go deeper, you know, my family came here from the Soviet Union. My grandparents, when they were in the Soviet Union, were trying to basically, resist the erasure of Jewish identity and culture, which, among other things, involved a massive machine of anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic propaganda, which did not just stay within the borders of the Soviet Union, but was exported out to the Western world, particularly to far-left movements at universities, in broader society, and this goes back to as far back as the 1960s and 70s. So you can look up news stories of, for example, Cesar Chavez coming out and saying that, I think in response to a resolution of the UN saying Zionism is racism, no, I support Israel's right to exist, and then an activist to his left basically denouncing him for that, and a lot of that again is based on the Soviet Union exporting these narratives, again weaponizing. At that point, the language was imperialism rather than colonialism, but weaponizing these things against Israel and the Jewish people. I could go on, but I'll leave it there.
April, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so important because we are trying, so many people are vilifying diversity, equity, and inclusion as the boogeyman, and it's not. It's actually the only place inside of these structures where we have room to talk about Jewish identity and anti-Semitism if we leverage it appropriately. The issue is maybe more with some of these other systems and these other things that are impacting how we're learning and the way that we understand Jewish identity. So millions, if not billions of dollars have been poured into American institutions of learning, higher institutions of learning, to get professorships and coursework and things that are very anti-Jewish and certainly have an agenda. So I want us to have a bigger lens. I want us to expand the lens of concern, unfortunately, and because there's this narrow focus on DEI and get rid of that thing. And it's so insidious and it's so much bigger than your little DEI program. It's you have to sort of look a lot higher up in the food chain, so to speak.
Yeah, so perfect. My next question was, I know your answer is yes, but so like lay it out for us, Yvette and April. Like, does DEI have the capacity for nuance? Can it grow and evolve to help remedy all the things that Max was just describing at the level of higher education? And I hadn't thought about that before, like how unfair it is that K through 12 schools, that system is going to having to rectify a problem that's being imported from really the top down. What are we going to do? Like, how do we do this? And can DEI be maybe a remedy to this problem?
I'm going to say yes, for sure. Absolutely, it can. I think that we need to like restructure ourselves and start with, like I said, bringing our Jewish community into the fold, because as a Black woman who was born in Alabama, I cannot tell you what your experience as a Jewish person is, or Latinx person. We have to stop thinking that the books are going to tell us how someone's experience is. So that's number one. Bringing people to the fold has to happen. That is, I know people see that as like, oh my God, that's more people I have to manage. Trust me, it's going to save you time, and it's going to save people from being hurt. That if you can bring them in and they can tell you how they're feeling and what their needs are, you don't have to read a book that tells you what it thinks their needs are, or what it thinks their experience is, because every experience is different and valued. And we have to start looking at it in that manner, because if we can't, that's when it's like, okay, now you don't care about me. You could care less about my experience, who I am. I am not valuable. We have to look at it from a sense of not black and white, not that, every person that is black has this experience, every person that's Jewish, or we have to understand that there's gray, there is rainbow, there's all these experiences that we will miss out on drastically if we don't start listening with compassion, and humility, and like really wanting to approach this work from that sense of care.
So April, thank you, Yvette. And then my brain wheels are turning. So it sounds to me like there's some training that could be done on the part of DEI practitioners. So April, with your work at Project Shema, what are some of the prescriptions that you would prescribe to DEI practitioners to help them understand and believe the Jewish experience?
Okay, and I'm gonna answer that and a little bit of your last question, because I think DEI has capacity for nuance. People sometimes don't, and we have I don't know what is going to happen with DEI after this administration, but I do know that there are inflection points in the journey. One of them was, if we recall, the murder of George Floyd. A lot of companies went out to hire DEI practitioners. There weren't enough DEI practitioners trained for that moment. So we also have an entire cohort of DEI professionals that may have different levels of what I think you're calling cultural humility and understanding of the landscape and how it should work. And so that's one of the reasons why we're looking at things that are so basic and binary, like, okay, you're going to tell me, I've got a book that tells me there's an oppressed and oppressor. That's easy for me to understand. Like, let me just put you in this bucket, and I need to keep you there so that I can manage all these other buckets over here. So what we do at Project Shema is we're all progressive Jewish people who have, in one way or another, been told in our progressive environments, whether that's bodily autonomy, abortion rights, me as a Black Jewish woman in DEI, other people working in others. Oh, one of my friends in politics, at 3 out of the 5 questions, or 2 out of the 5 questions, just to be a delegate in California, were, would you promise to say this about Israel? California, we have, yeah, you can Google that article. So we had all experienced this cleaving of Jews from good society. That's part of the beginning of the dehumanization and demonization of Jews, which then leads to isolation, right? We can't be part of good society anymore. And then that leads to violence against us, or the dehumanization of Jews. And we have not seen that stop in thousands of years of our existence on this planet. So Project Shema is an organization, we're a nonprofit that is built to address some of these issues. For me, as the VP of DEI, I reach out to DEI professionals, or many of them now know about us and reach out to us to bring that education, not only for the DEI professionals in an organization, but also to teach, in the case of schools, faculty and staff. We don't teach young people yet, but there are plenty of other organizations that do that. But we're here to really educate. We've done entire school districts. I was in Oakland School District last week, or a couple weeks ago. I've been in Massachusetts. Certainly, we've bounced all over. And I care especially about this topic because I have K-12 kids, and I could see the writing on the wall. Luckily, my district, I haven't seen anything too concerning, but I'm an LA native. I've heard a lot of, really bad things happening in the Los Angeles community, which is, again, has a higher percentage of Jews than some other communities maybe like Alabama, I don't know. But if it's Baruch line, this should concern us all. If some of the worst stories that we're hearing are coming in places with higher Jewish populations. So yeah, we educate, we explain we've diagnosed 4 problems. The 4 problems are people don't know who Jews are. It's the stuff of means. Are you guys a religion? Are you an ethnicity? Like, what are you? We predate all that. Uh, they don't know what anti-Semitism is or how it works. Those are the 2 things. What is anti-Semitism? Like, what is this thing? It's a people hatred. Once it was a religious bigotry, but then Hitler decided it was something you could not convert out of. This is who you are as a people. So it's really more of a racialized bigotry today. And then how anti-Semitism works. It's a light sleeper. So no matter where Jews have gone, anywhere, including Israel, where our ancient homeland of Judea, the word Jew comes from Judea, the land, it's not shorthand for the religion, because we were a people for 2,000 years before we got religion. That's in the weeds. But so the 4 problems again, don't know who we are, don't know what anti-Semitism is, don't know how it works, because it doesn't matter what our skin tone is or what our status is, how much money we have. Everywhere we've ever gone, we've reached some level of status and security to have it drop, and you have 24 hours to move and pack up your belongings. You get 1 bag, maybe. Good luck. And so, and the place we experienced the most harm was where we were white in a white continent in Europe, to this day, right? So who are Jews? What is anti-Semitism? How does it work? And then this idea of Jews having proximity to whiteness or access to whiteness means that when we are sitting here telling you, like, right, believe us, when we're telling you that this is harming us or we are experiencing harm in some way, we're not believed. Because wait, I'm looking at you and you look like majority culture. And they're not understanding, well, no, in Charlottesville, they're saying absolutely not. They're saying Jews will not replace us. The great replacement theory, all the Nazis, symbols and signs and, things. And so I think we have to get to a place like what you said is believe when people tell you who they are and what they're experiencing, believe them. You have to get past skin tone. And access to whiteness, and understand that our access to whiteness has not kept us safe in the history of Jewish people.
Yes. Max, tell me how and if Stand With Us is engaging with DEI professionals. Is it more like not you are reactive, but parents, like here in Palos Verdes, we come to Stand With Us, help us. They're not listening to us. They think that we're making this up, or they're not taking it seriously. Help us, help us, help us. Or are DEI professionals also approaching Stand With Us?
We've had more of the first thing happen than the second thing. Unfortunately, the second thing has happened. I would actually add a third scenario, which we're expanding right now and we're trying to grow it more and more, which is that we have now 2 experienced K-12 administrators. Well, one's an experienced K-12 administrator and classroom teacher. The other is just an experienced classroom teacher who are going around the whole country doing professional development and training for every part of the adult K-12 school community. So we were talking about the school board members, the administrators, the teachers, the school counselors, and it's going to end up being a lot of the same content about who Jews are and what anti-Semitism is as Project Shema is going to teach you about. I think we're very much on the same page, and K through 12 education is way bigger than even our 2 organizations could ever handle. The second part of our training is really giving each one of those categories of K through 12 professionals the specific tools and best practices that they need in their particular context. Again, whether they're a school board member, an administrator, a teacher, or a counselor, how they can proactively prevent and respond to anti-Semitism in their schools. And then there's also a whole kind of separate training for curriculum writers, but that's a little bit kind of aside from the DEI aspect of things. So that's not just solely specific to DEI, but it's a resource where we can start to really fill in the educational gaps that we currently have across the whole country in all these institutions. Whether those issues are just pure ignorance, which is actually, frankly, the better situation, or it's because, like I said, people went through some higher education institutions that filled their heads with a bunch of misinformation and bad ideas, and now we're having to try to come in and undo some of that damage.
Thank you, Max. So we've heard of some great resources that we have to work within the DEI framework to make it better and to include Jewish community, to address those gaps. Let's say our concerns aren't being taken seriously. What recourse do we have? Any answers to that question? And then I'm going to open it up to questions from the Zoom audience and those who are here with us tonight.
I'm going to go back to having an affinity group, a group where you are not by yourself going to get things done, but you are going as a group, and you are partnering with the school. I think there's a difference than if you have a group that is meeting and not in partnership with the school and then all of a sudden show up. I think it's important to meet or invite, maybe if it's a head of school, if it's a principal, invite them into a meeting, let them hear what's going on, what are your feelings, what's your experience in the school. I think that part is so important, and that's going to start the building of community. We did that with every single one of our affinity groups and alliance groups, just so that because it's different for each group. And so as we're meeting with our Jewish families, really being able to hear what their experience is, now we have framework of like, what is the work that we need to do? And then partner with it. Like, you want to make the people who have the power to make change and support you. You want to make them your partners in this work. So for me, that's one way of doing it.
Nobody's going to want to hear this, but the strategy is a little bit more long term. We need to vote. We need to get on school boards. We need to be more proactive in the environments in which our children go to school. We have to become more engaged and continue. Not give up, because there is this idea like, hey, your kid's gonna be gone in 2 years, 1 year, bye, right? And so there's death by 1,000 cuts kind of approach to some of this that I've seen. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but some of the schools are just waiting for you to be gone, and there are certainly ways for you to be more engaged and offer. Maybe you put parents together and say, hey, if you don't have the resources, we will offer to fundraise to bring training to your staff, or we have these resources to train your staff. Is that something you would consider? Because we're getting this so wrong. And like what I said earlier, we're wasting a lot of time and energy on this. You could be doing other things. We just want to make sure that you understand our community, because I'm sure in the last X number of years of your career, this probably hasn't been reached a crisis moment, but it is, and we have to listen to that. So I think sometimes we don't have the open ears and open hearts like we have in you, but I think the long-term strategy is definitely getting more involved, and even getting involved in DEI. One of the grandmothers of DEI, of Garden Schwartz and Rowe, was Jewish, and a lot of Jewish people there are Jewish, DEI professionals and practitioners, but I think getting involved is very key.
Thank you, Max.
So multiple things here, but I think the place to start is with yourself and with educating yourself to the greatest possible extent about the issues at hand and how to communicate about them effectively. I think within our community, like we've seen a lot of situations where parents or students will come to us and basically submit a report about an anti-Semitic incident that happened. So they understand that something wrong happened, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily know exactly how to communicate that properly in a way that they'll be understood and they're asking for the right action to be taken from whether it's their teacher or the principal or higher levels up. So we have a lot of resources for that. There's a couple of booklets at the front if you want to grab them. And we have a whole library of them on different topics. But I brought two that I thought were relevant. One about the Jewish people, a lot of just the basic things that you would want anyone to know about the Jewish community around the world. And another about the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. Because if you're going to talk to administrators or teachers or whoever about an anti-Semitic incident, you need to be working off a specific definition that's widely accepted around the world by governments, by organizations. That definition is the IHRA working definition with its specific examples that illustrate what kinds of different forms anti-Semitism can take. And of course, we have the print materials, but we also have guidance that we can give folks to better educate themselves and get better at communicating in these contexts, which are difficult. So it starts with you, but then it's kind of like you walk up a ladder of I don't know. Escalation is like an evocative word, but it's kind of like you walk up a ladder and take the process one step at a time. Let's say something wrong. There was some kind of anti-Semitism in a classroom. The first step is you have a conversation with that teacher, and in an ideal world, that resolves it. The teacher recognizes there's a problem, handles the problem the right way. Great. Everyone moves on with their lives. Hopefully nothing like that happens again. The teacher just refuses to respond or responds the wrong way, then you're talking to the principal. Still getting nowhere, still getting stonewalled, then you're going and talking to the superintendent. Still getting nowhere, well, the boss of the superintendent is the school board. If you're still at that point getting nowhere, the school board members have to run for a re-election every so often, right? And even while you're waiting for them to potentially be up for election again, there is potential legal action that can be taken via Title VI complaints, which have kind of a lower threshold, and actual lawsuits if you find that a school or school district is violating the law. And I'll add a last one, which is just public exposure and press coverage, which is ugly and the lawsuits are ugly, and that's not where any of us want to go. But if it's that bad and there's no responsiveness and no positive movement, those are basically the options that you have available to you.
And I want to say something about some of the private schools, which is so heartbreaking, is that because we have celebrity kids and whatever at some of the private schools, they have these non-disclosure agreements that if they go to the press about anything related to the school, that their child can be kicked out, is my understanding. And so you have parents who, for the entire duration of their child experiencing bad things in some of the schools, or even the parents, they can't say a word until their child graduates, or if they want to remain at the school. So there have to be better ways of managing that. Or, I don't know if the law is the law, right? If you violate the law, then there should be repercussions for that. But if you can't go to the press, do you have any suggestions or thoughts?
So I think in a private school context, I would think that they don't have a publicly elected board, but they have a board. So that's your last step in internal accountability. I think that if you're in a situation where you can't go to the press, it's a toxic environment, but you are committed to your kid really wants to stay, you're committed to staying there, then the answer is probably to try to really, really ramp up the education that happens within that school. And it's basically going to take you and your kid and ideally other Jewish students or allies of those students within the school getting maybe a little bit more courageous and speaking up much more consistently, putting on educational programs, really speaking out internally without necessarily crossing any boundaries that would potentially get them kicked out. I think if we stand our ground, if we refuse to be silenced, if we counter every time there's some kind of anti-Semitism or bias, and also proactively educate in any environment, whether it's a private school or anywhere else, then we're still, even if we didn't fix the specific harm that happened, that like started the whole process off in the wrong direction, we're at least making some kind of progress.
I'm gonna add one other suggestion that I'm seeing in a public school district that had an exodus, a mass exodus of Jewish and Israeli students and families. They are going to be adding Jewish as under ethnicity for the options that students and people can take. So I highly recommend, people don't have to select it, but it might also give you a better sense of how people identify coming into your school. So if they just, it's an option, right? But putting in, if you have religion, obviously you want to have Jewish religion as an option, but having Jewish under the ethnicity bucket, because now this district is trying to figure out like, how many heads did we lose based on our inability to manage this problem? Because it was more than what they thought, because they're Black Jewish families, they're Asian Jewish families, like they weren't seeing the whole landscape of who the Jews were in their school district, and they lost them because they weren't managing. So vote with your feet.
Just to add to what both of you all said, because I'm at a private school, one of the things that we had to come up with, and it happened after all of the Black at accounts where Black students at all institutions kind of lashed out on Instagram and started accounts, and they were able to talk and share their experiences that they had gone through for years. And so out of that discussion of like what happened, a lot of schools have come up with a bias reporting tool. And what that is that you can go online, it should be posted around your school when there is, whether it's racial or anti-Semitic, whatever the bias or discrimination is, you go on, you fill it out, it creates data of like what is happening. And you don't have to put your name. We like when because that gives us more information and ability to go through a restorative practice, but you can go anonymous, but just report what happened to you. And that allows the school to see what kind of work needs to be done. It prioritizes that work from seeing, if there's a high propensity for anti-Semitism, then we need more work here, And so just throwing that out, a lot of schools started those in the private school.
So I actually just forgot a super important new tool that's out there specifically for the public schools. There was just in the last California state legislative session, a change made with something called the uniform complaint procedures, where in the past, basically, if you were a parent or a student, you would fill out these, they're called UCP complaints, and you'd send them to your school or your school district. And then in the vast majority of cases that we heard about, schools were just dragging their feet endlessly and not resolving anything. And by the time there was any kind of response, it was so far after the incident happened that it was kind of pointless anyway. So now the big change is that you can send your UCP complaint directly to the California Department of Education, and the California Department of Education has some basically financial penalties at its disposal, where if even after the CDE steps in and says, hey, school district, you actually need to appropriately address this issue, and they still don't, that school district or that school can face some potential financial penalties for failing to take action. I would say that's kind of one of those last resort type steps if none of the other parts of the school or the school district handled the issue appropriately.
Is that only for public schools or all schools?
I'm not sure the CD really has any kind of power over private schools.
And that would mitigate any fear of retaliation within, like a parent may have, if I report this to if it's a Title VI complaint to the school, like does that keep it a little more anonymous? Because that's been an issue that's a concern for most parents is what's going to happen to my kid if it comes back to them and the principal knows it's my child. How do we get around that?
That is a great question. I don't know that I have a one size fits all answer to that one. It's complicated, and I think it's going to have to be a case by case in all those situations.
Okay, so questions. Tell me your question. I'll repeat it for the Zoom world. And yes. So the question is for Yvette about since October 7, if at Oakwood specifically, because that's where Yvette works, if a Palestinian affinity group arose, and so there's a Jewish affinity group, there's a Palestinian affinity group, and those are sort of competing, the way it's framed, that these are competing interests and just at war with each other. So so if it has or if it hasn't, how would you manage this dynamic?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that,
No, so an educational inversion situation has happened. And how are we going to enter that into the rest of this question? And how would you address that in your position?
so first part of that is, has that happened? Yes. Yeah, that happened. We have a Greater Middle Eastern affinity group, and there was a student who was Palestinian who had family in Gaza and was struggling and in a lot of pain because of the conflict that was happening and fear. And this student didn't feel like the Greater Middle Eastern Affinity Group was the space. And so what ended up happening is she created her own affinity space with a teacher. We have faculty sponsors that are over all of those groups. And I got like the bigger problem with that was education. And if a faculty member is over that particular type of group, it could go really wrong, right? And so we had to step in and kind of put a halt to that and bring in education guests who actually knew what they were talking about and actually help inform that. Now, it doesn't mean that the student was excited about the like stepping into it, but it was necessary, right? And our Jewish affinity space, they knew about it, so there was this feeling of like, I would say, fear, like, is this going to cause a school catastrophe, right? Uprise against us. And so when those kind of things happen, you have to jump in immediately. But we couldn't just fix it like, this is how it's going to be. We took time, we met as an administration. It wasn't just my decision. It was as an administration with the head of school and everything. How do we want to handle this? And I think you want to have that set up before those things happen, because then you have a place to go to, so that it's not just me saying this is how it should be, but there's a collective mind and thought of like how what harm is happening through this, and how can we support this student and their emotions and feelings without demonizing another group. So it became that thing. And that was, as you know, with a lot of schools, a very difficult balance to ensure that, and also protect students who felt fearful that they might be demonized.
I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that. To bring in educators, how did you determine, and who helped you determine who were the right educators for that topic? It's an information war. How did you make that happen?
So we actually had a Jewish group of parents that we talked to. We they were like, we're fine. We understand, like, this is happening. We empathize, and so that's okay. And we want you to do that. But we had to. We reached out to a few people, college professors, but also our head of school reached out to a few other heads of school and got some names and educational material and possibilities, so that we can actually do that without giving misinformation, and really, like, this is an affinity group and the focus is on how you are feeling, not how you're mad about a group or something. We want to make sure that that student is not feeling like, to honor their emotions, that there is fear. If your family is there, of course you're going to be afraid, and we have to empathize and honor that. And so we needed to, when we brought in someone to support that, it was someone that understood that specific understanding about our school, that we needed that specific thing to happen.
Jeremy. So let me recap. Jeremy's question is referring to Barry Weiss's article called End DEI, that instead of Jews arguing the way into the system, that it just needs to go away. Is it hopeless, or is it worth saving? Is there a way to work within this? Is there any hope?
I've been in the game for so long, it's not going anywhere. It's just not. So if you can't beat them, join them. We have to figure out a way to counsel DEI and not cancel DEI. And then, like I said earlier, this is us tilting at windmills and chasing a boogeyman who is not the sole source of our downfall, right? Like DEI is not the reason that Jews are experiencing anti-Semitism. If you look at the long arc of anti-Semitism, it's existed pre-Jesus. Do you know what I'm saying? Like people are going to find a way to hate Jews. If DEI is the new model, whatever comes after it is going to be worse, right? So it is a space where we can talk about anti-Semitism. It is a place where we can actually be DEI practitioners. Um, we can throw it out, but it's embedded into how we do work and the expectations of our staff, at least in the U.S. I don't know how. Although I've done global DEI, I don't necessarily know how other countries are feeling about this, but I think the best thing to do, and also here's the other thing, even if, let's pretend DEI does get eliminated, even though Marco Rubio, whoever, Trump, all these people are calling for the end of DEI, who do you think is going to get blamed at the end? Boom. Yeah, it's going to be us. So because we complained about it, the 2%, 1% of the 2% of the population was able to successfully dismantle DEI. I don't think so, but it is part of the conspiracy theories against us. So are there bad DEI practitioners? Yes, like any profession. But I think we're expending an inordinate amount of energy trying to tackle something when it's really like liberated ethnic studies and some of these other, the coursework, like there are specific actual things going on that are educating and providing bad data sets to people who then believe them. And I think we need to spend a lot more energy at the top of the funnel to help K-12.
So there's a question from the Zoom, which is perfect. Next question. So I feel like there is an elephant in the room, which is Free Palestine. It has completely taken over DEI and is actively working to exclude Jews and Israelis. Because DEI has a built-in oppressor-oppressed binary and Palestine is so firmly established as oppressed within DEI, inevitably Jews become the oppressor side, and that's why they're being excluded. How can DEI accept a group they consider to be an oppressor into their tent? My question to the DEI folks is, how can this built-in tension within DEI ever be bridged? And then there's a little bit more. In fact, I would argue Free Palestine has overtaken and subsumed DEI and has become all-consuming for most progressives. They see Jews as the worst offenders at all. Who would like to take that? Thank you for the question from Zoom World. Yes.
Okay. So number one, I mean, I think based on, I think everything you've heard in this panel, like, there's going to be DEI professionals who do have a very inaccurate and binary view of the world where everybody's either in an oppressor or oppressed bucket, and the Jews are clearly on the oppressor side of things, and so and we're either never going to win or going to have a really, really hard time reversing, changing that person's mind and changing how they do things in their school environment or wherever they're working. That's out there. Like we're all dealing with, not all, but a lot of us are dealing with that in lots of different cases. There's going to be others who are much more receptive to education or already know that that's not how the world works. And again, I think we get hung up on with the name of something. It's easy to say, okay, the target and the problem is DEI because it's 3 short letters and we can all just like identify a specific thing out there that's causing us harm. But again, the bad ideas that are expressing themselves through too many DEI programs and professionals, they're also coming at us through so many other avenues, and DEI is clearly not the root cause of it. Like I said before, it's a symptom. So the larger solution here isn't to say, okay, we're just going to, deal with one of the symptoms by basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater in that one context, rather than focusing on the bigger picture, which is there's this set of bad ideas out there about how the world works in general and specifically how Jews fit within it. And we're going to tackle that set of bad ideas through widespread education across the board to correct the misconceptions, to correct the misinformation, to correct the prejudice that we're facing. I think that's just what we have to do across the board, whether it's in DEI or in ethnic studies or in any of the other places where we're dealing with these problems. The other point, and it speaks to the question about, what do you do when you have these two different groups who are both saying, we're facing hatred, we're facing discrimination, we're facing harm? That is a very difficult challenge because we have actual serious substantive conflicts, right? That's not just a lack of education, but to give you a specific example, the vast majority of Jews, and this is from poll after poll after poll and study after study, say if you deny Israel's right to exist, that's a form of anti-Semitism, okay? Which essentially means that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. On the flip side of that, you have folks who are Palestinian or supporters of the Palestinian cause who say, if you say that I am anti-Semitic when or that it's anti-Semitic for me to say Israel has no right to exist, you are engaging in anti-Palestinian racism because you're silencing my voice and my ability to speak out against the oppression that I face. Like if nobody kind of shifts their position in that situation, that's an irreconcilable conflict. Like there's no bridging that. And then it's up to the professional at the school where that's happening, unfortunately, to make a judgment call. Like, are the Jews who are saying that denying Israel's right to exist, that's anti-Semitic? Are we basically in their corner? Or are we in the corner of the folks who say that denying our right to deny Israel's right to exist it is its own form of you have to just be able to ultimately make a moral and factual judgment call between those two things. I don't envy that position. I obviously have a clear opinion about what in that specific situation the judgment call should be, but that's what needs to happen. Some courageous decisions need to happen.
April, Yvette, do you want to add?
Yeah, those are always so complex because it's not, we need a whole night just on that kind of thing. But yeah, when I'm hearing the slogan and you're summing up the situation to a slogan of Free Palestine, that is to me not even you're not, what am I trying to say here? You're not actually dealing with the conflict and you haven't done the work that you need to do. A lot of times when folks are saying that, they are in that kind of binary way of thinking where it's good, bad, and not understanding the historical history of from a place that's far away from here. You have people here judging what you said, April, judging this situation through a lens of America, right? And so this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with not taking people serious and also not knowing the full picture. And I think that is the work of a DEI person. And you can't, it's not going to happen overnight. And that's why I tell my parents, my Jewish parents, I'm here with you. We're going to do this together, because This isn't going to be like I go into the room and go, no, 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 you do it again, you're in trouble. And they're going to just automatically change their views. No, that is the easy way out. There is work to be done because even if you kick a student out that says something, right? You're just sending them along to another place with that same mindset. You have to do actual work to educate and support. This is a long game. And so, yes, I see that. The fires happened and I did the horrible thing of like, I'm on Instagram and I read the comments and I saw Free Palestine. This happened because of what you did, and I'm like, I'm Black and this affected my family and that didn't feel good. Instead of empathy, you're attaching a situation to something that has nothing to do with what's happening in Gaza.
There more questions from the audience? Jacob. So I think, well, I mean, lots of things have been said this evening to think about. I think some main takeaways that I'm going to go home with is, I think it was validating for us, like the community here, what we've been working against, trying to work with, and in partnership with local school districts, is that we need to not give up and we have to continue being those pesky Jews in their faces. And that we have very incredible DEI practitioners who believe that it can get better. And within this framework, I think that's a new thought for me, honestly, that DEI is exactly the space where Jews can insert themselves and insist on our being seen and heard and respected, just as we see, hear, and respect every other group, and that there shouldn't be a double standard for Jews within the DEI space. And it's okay if there is a gap, but we have to find the people who are willing to work with us to bridge the gap. And of course, the frustration is when you meet those people who are not going to, who they don't want to, right? There are some people who are hate filled and they cannot have empathy. But I would argue that that's not the majority of human beings, or else we wouldn't work the way it does, which is pretty well for the most of the time, especially in this country. We're very privileged to live in the United States. So let me just see if there's anything else from Miriam. There is a, I got all the questions, right, from the audience, Miriam? There's another one? The same person, no? No, it's not the same person. Okay, so I was going to try to sum it up, but we have a few more minutes. So here we go. I want to include everyone's voices. So it sounds like higher education is being taught biased information about Jews in Israel. Since the teachers and DEI directors in the schools come from that background, what can be built into the DEI institution to counter this issue? I realize the panelists are spreading education about Jews, but that is grassroots. Is DEI framework flawed without something formal for Jewish issues? I'm not entirely sure. So whatever you got from that, please respond to.
What I heard was, what we're doing is happening on a case by case basis. It's whack-a-mole. It's not the solution. And the solution really is partnering with the certification bodies that offer DEI training in the first place. So I have reached out to several of them, and if any of you know folks at Cornell who provide DEI certifications, or some of these other SHRM or others, and there is sort of a I don't want to deal with this vibe, or maybe I'm not the person, but if you know people in any of these larger certification bodies, we certainly we need to have access and be a part of the conversation in the institutions of DEI, and that includes campus. And so I think that is part of the overall strategy that we should aspire to do, is to also make sure that Jewish identity and anti-Semitism education are part of the broader education of DEI practitioners.
And also, like in K through 12 schools, like in secondary schools specifically, like you can actually create classes, where students can learn and specifically about the Jewish experience. And I think that's another space that we need to like start looking at. Doesn't have to just go to higher education. We can start, and when they're in secondary school or and younger.
So the first thing I'm going to say is I think that we have a lot more potential trying to make progress undoing some of the damage that higher education causes through K through 12 institutions, just because frankly, like they're more accessible and really easier to have a strong voice in if you are a stakeholder of that school, whether it's because you're a student or a parent or a teacher or whatever kind of stakeholder there, or because you're voting for that school board or whatever it may be. You have more of a say in the decision making that happens in your local school or the private school you send your kids to than you do in these huge institutions that their decision making is not particularly democratic, if at all, and what influences their decision making is in far too many cases much harder for us to try to change in any meaningful way. That's not to say that there aren't situations where we can't. There are still different departments in higher education where people are receptive. There are still administrations that are receptive to doing good things on educating about anti-Semitism and all of that. We should take all those opportunities wherever we can. There's a program at George Washington University that brings I think faculty and administrators from schools of education, specifically graduate schools of education, and teaches them about all the things we've been talking about here: Jewish identity, anti-Semitism, etc. We could take that model and replicate it lots of other places. That's something we should do, but also it's such a huge problem and such a widespread problem. We should not be relying on that to be solved anytime soon, unfortunately.
So we're in it for the long haul. So I want to thank Amy Berlin and Miriam Cohn for facilitating, making the space available and all the lead up to the event this evening. I want to thank our incredible panelists. Obviously, we could talk for many more hours, but we are out of time. So thank you again for the time and resources that came into this evening to be with us tonight and to speak so open and frank about your work and your experiences and the challenges and being honest. I think these are difficult conversations to have, and it's just really nice to have them. I feel like a sense of relief actually after having this conversation. I feel like there's something to do. It's worthwhile, right? Like we have somewhere to go. I hope that next month everyone will join us for the next installment, which is called Building Mental Resilience Against Hate. We're going to listen to extraordinary stories from those who survived hateful ideologies and emerged with compassion intact. We're going to learn practical tips on how to identify, challenge, and stop divisive rhetoric, whether encountered online or in person, and gain valuable insight on fostering compassion, critical thinking, and healing in schools, communities, at home. There is a flyer about this outside, I think, or inside the synagogue. It's going in the newsletter. It will go out in the next South Bay Jewish Advisory Group newsletter as well. This is really a program that we're gearing toward teenagers, especially. So if you are a teenager or a young person, or teenagers or young persons, please encourage them to attend February 19th, 7 to 9 p.m. right here in this very sanctuary. So with that, I will close the evening. Thank you all for being here tonight, and you are welcome anytime, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.